Welcome to the Untold Civil War, and we're here with yet another upcoming auction from Fleischer's Auctions, and we're going to be checking out some really amazing pieces of history. And of course, with me is Kevin Canberg, who's been on before, and of course, Adam, who's also been on before. So thank you so much for coming on the show and doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Um,
Great
Adam, I
having you.
guess maybe we should let you kickstart this. So, what is the story about this collection? How did you come by it? And, what's the history behind it all?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I could spend hours talking about the person behind this collection, Alejandro Alex de Quesada Jr. But to be succinct, he was a consummate collector who was interested in military history from ancient civilizations to modern day conflicts. He had a vast collection and acquired material over the course of decades. He was the author of, I think, at least several dozen books. And the topics ranged from the history of Florida to Civil War regiments. His interests were very diverse. Unfortunately, he passed away early last year, and it was an untimely death. He was, I think, only 60 years old. And now we are offering this collection, or at least a part of it, in the not this Saturday, but the Saturday after this, November 22nd. And we're calling this part one. It's going to be a multi-sale affair, and the focus really is pre-19th century artifacts. And this really represents, I think, the best of his collection, so to speak, or at least the most valuable of material that was produced before 1900.
So, Kevin, maybe you can talk about this a little bit. What stands out to you immediately about this collection?
I had the pleasure of knowing Alex during his life, and what jumps out to me about this catalog and the collection generally, which as Adam said is just epic, is he was an exuberant collector. He was a exuberant buyer. He was trying to collect the history, the 250 years of American history, and then even beyond, as into older periods of time. And it's such an ambitious collecting um, viewpoint. And so that's why we start the auction lot one. It starts with George Washington, and it goes all the way through. I think there's material related to the Rolling Stones and artwork, and contemporary like 1970s artwork by the end of it. And it was just he had a great eye for really unique and interesting pieces. It's a little challenging to group things in Alex's collection. There's so much of it that you can, but in the sense of he everything interested him, and he always looked for the best of whatever interested him. So it makes this is a very almost an eclectic catalog. So there's truly something for everyone's something for everyone.
Well, I figure since on the show we're very much obsessed with Civil War photography. So maybe we should kick it off right here. Adam, what can you tell us about this slot?
I'd be happy to. And actually, I think that you started off with a good one to talk about because I actually sold these images to Alex when he was alive. So I know a little bit more about them than even the catalog would let on. Prior to starting the auction company, I was a private dealer, and these came from a collector outside of Detroit, Michigan. And what he told me was that they were sold initially at an estate sale local to him, so somewhere in Michigan. And so he always believed that this soldier was probably from Detroit. Uh, in a regiment maybe that was raised there, or maybe he was lived there before the war and then enlisted for service. But of course, this is very interesting, these portraits, because they depict an African American soldier. And it's the same man we think in both portraits, even though he looks a little bit different. I think that that difference is due to just the focus of the camera, or it could be sort of a at the beginning of the war, in the middle of the war, because he looks quite a bit older in the portrait from the viewer's perspective on the right side. But it could just be that the focus is a little bit better in that one. But yeah, they're excellent. As Kevin will tell you, portraits of black soldiers in uniform during the Civil War are very rare, and to have two, and he's carrying a horn, and was probably a musician. I mean, it just makes it all the more desirable.
Kevin, can you speak to that? I mean, an African American soldier image is already rare. Then you add the fact that it's a musician. I mean, now it's even going to another level, another tier of rarity. Can you speak to that?
And I'll take it to a third tier. Very unusual to see what we would consider like a sweetheart image. It's a desirable little subset of Civil War photography. They're very popular. They sort of have a universal appeal. And so to see someone who was in a U.S. colored troops regiment with their significant other, we don't know what their relationship is, but it does look like a fairly intimate portrait. So it's fair to say that they are, romantically linked. That's also a neat spin on this group of images. I always like to think, is this image affecting? Like, can I connect with it? And that in particular, where he's solo on the right, it's such a clear image. You can really examine all the details. You can examine the sort of look on his face. It's a wonderful portrait.
I agree. I mean, it's just you don't really see that out in the wild, right? This is something that you very rarely come across. And of course, I gotta click on this image right here because this is a guy who was photographed quite a lot actually, but yet still, this is a very valuable image. You can see Custer images going for a very pretty penny. Um, who are we looking at here? Who's the legend in this image? Adam, if you want to take a shot at that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Custer loved to have his photograph, and he loved attention. And this is a rare view. There was a scholar, I think with the last name Katz, who put together, um, uh, the reference guide for all of the different portraits taken of Custer during his lifetime. And I don't know if it's referenced here in the description. If you go down a little bit, you can see exactly if it is or not. No, it doesn't look like it is. But of course, it was taken during the war. He's wearing general's insignia. And yeah, I mean, Custer remains a very collectible collecting genre, and this is probably going to exceed its estimate.
Well, the one story we tell about Custer on the Untold Civil War podcast is actually about his brother, Tom Custer, who earns two Medals of Honor during the Civil War. And yet, most people don't know about his brother, but they do know about Armstrong here. So, very interesting, for sure.
Yeah, and it has the imprint on the back of a photographer whose studio was in Philadelphia, and this does look like a first generation print. Thurston was able to obtain the original negative from a different photographer. He probably is the person who took the photograph. So Custer may have been in Philadelphia when this was taken.
Kevin, can you tell us what this portrait is? I mean, a carte de visite, what is that? For those of us who might not know.
Sure. So, carte de visites are essentially what 19th century photography evolved into, almost its final form. Eventually, just like most systems, they sort of get focused on efficiency, cost. The producers are always trying to make more for less. And as as early photography technology evolved in the 19th century, from daguerreotypes to ambrotypes to tintypes and finally paper images, it was a very easy way to bring photography to the masses. And so you could stroll into a photographer's gallery and you could pick up a whole stack of these if you wanted to. I have an interest in sports cards aside from this stuff, and I see them as kind of like the proto sports cards. Like, yeah, there's a lot of Custer images out there, but there are also a lot of Mickey Mantle baseball cards out there, and it doesn't really impact the value too much, right? So, Custer has universal appeal. Everybody knows Custer.
Another part of the Civil War that I think doesn't get enough recognition is sort of the naval side of things. the Anaconda Plan by General Scott, blockading the South. Adam, I never really handled cloth items from the Civil War. Can you talk a little bit about this and what is it like holding actual cloth items from the war?
Textiles and leather items are not really my area of expertise. As the owner of an auction firm, we handle a diverse amount of material, and I delegate what I can to people who know what they're talking about. But I can tell you when we handle this, unlike photography, which Kevin and I both love, and documents and artifacts, and for me, I really like flags and swords too. But even those don't really feel quite as profound as when you handle textile items and leather, because they were actually worn by people living during that time. And this is a rare example, a sailor's regulation hat. And you're right that U.S. Navy doesn't, as a genre, really doesn't get as much attention. It's sort of the redheaded stepchild of Civil War collecting, but there's definitely an enthusiastic collecting community. And my memory is that this embroidered design on the top of that doesn't really align with any sort of regulation that was prescribed by the by federal regulations for uniforms at the time. It was just sort of a common thing done as handiwork by sailors who were serving. And so you can see that this isn't just a nice example of an element of a sailor's uniform during the Civil War. It's also a piece of folk art. And it represents sort of the handiwork of the person, the skilled craftsmanship of the person who put it together.
As Kevin, you can imagine them on blockade duty with not much going on, just sewing each other's hats or something like that, just to decorate, keep, pass the time, as the Hunley's coming for them, right? This is it's fantastic, right? The mind can go so many places with this, but true history before us. This is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Now, we do cover a lot of different parts of history in this auction right here in this collection. And there's one thing I thought, since we're speaking to the naval part of things, the maritime part, I had to click on this. This stood out to me. Who doesn't love
Mhm.
pirates? I mean, uh, Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about your opinion on this awesome image here, this painting here?
You're right to call it awesome. One of the fun things about, I talked a little bit about Alex's exuberance for collecting, and it's so expansive. It's almost, you really do need hours and hours to kind of talk about it. But one of the great subsets of his interest was artwork, military artwork, I think, first and foremost. But you have an original Rick Reeves painting here, extremely talented and renowned artist. A very chaotic and bloody scene happening on the deck of a ship, commemorating a historic event. I could see why Alex was enamored with this. Why, it's very easy to sort of look around the breadth of his collection and say, oh yeah, this is something he would definitely find really, really, really cool. Um, I think you have it zoomed in there on the kind of the wounded guys on the deck, like laying in blood and swords laying everywhere. It's a chaotic scene, a really well executed piece of artwork. It's I'm sure going to get a lot of interest. I don't think all Civil War or military collectors branch into art inspired by those wars. So I have to say, as a enjoyer of that type of artwork, I give Alex credit, because he's kind of one of the few that had the foresight to explore that genre.
Well, Adam, I mean, you've got this wide collection here, and I guess you could say if you're collecting these things, you also have to curate these things, right? So I'm imagining setting up your office with this collection, having the images, having the swords, having the paintings. This is well rounded, correct?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's very difficult just to convey how extensive his collection was and is. Um, he did have a particular fascination with the history of piracy and also Colonial Williamsburg. He went to Colonial Williamsburg often, and when we were reviewing many items in his collection, a lot were purchased from Colonial Williamsburg shops, which specialized in recreating some of the items of the period with accuracy. And I guess that relates to the artwork of Rick Reeves, because he, along with Don Troiani and other contemporary artists, kind of exist in this genre of art where they uh, recreate, scenes like this one and others you can see in the lot 100, 102 with incredible accuracy. And so people like Alex, who really valued that, were fans. And that's why there are so many original pieces of art in the collection that relate to military history that were done by Rick Reeves and Don Troiani and others, because Alex, more than anyone else I ever knew, really valued that. Oh,
This is something I definitely wanted to
oh,
talk about here because I believe when we sat down and we spoke about Confederate images, Kevin, we did speak about these D-guard Bowie knives, and we saw them in the images. We spoke about them, but here it is, right in front of us. Kevin, can we revisit the D-guard and the symbolism, how it's become so iconic with Confederate images?
Absolutely. So, first and foremost, these knives are they're beautiful. They are, I consider them folk art, and the variations are really vast. You could make an entire lifetime of studying and collecting this style of knife. It's the most iconic weapon associated with the Confederacy, and as a photography collector, or as someone who knows that market very well, images of Confederate soldiers holding these or displaying these for the camera are usually the absolute top of the market. They're the most desirable images. There's something uh, almost tragic about these guys going to go get their photo made, and they want to appear warlike, and they want to appear like tough heroes and fighters, and the idea that we're going to win a war with a what is essentially an impractical and clunky knife is it's not necessarily very realistic, but it is romantic, and it is very dashing. And so it's one thing, Alex had some absolutely tremendous Confederate photographs. He had photographs of all elements of American history, but he really appreciated Southern photography to a higher degree, and had a lot of images focusing on soldiers holding knives like this. But he also had a really incredible collection of D guards themselves, or D guard knives themselves. A lot of them were made by blacksmiths, or sort of locally, so they really add a very personal flavor um, to images and weaponry in the Civil War.
Adam, what did you think about these Confederate pikes? I mean, when you get to handle these or look at these, I mean, these are also very interesting and typically I don't think people think of pikes in the Civil War, right? This is kind of different.
no, just like the Bowie knife, that really didn't have much of a practical application during the war, but was more emblematic of Southern military culture. The pike wasn't exactly practical in the same way, and so you see them being used at the beginning of the war, but quickly being discarded as the war progressed. I mean, imagine having a pike and being in battle against someone with a Gatling gun or a carbine. I mean, it just was ridiculous. And the pike, I mean, it's very similar to how knights would what's that called? on horseback would
Like,
try to kill each other. So it's emblematic of warfare, but also not sizing that Alex had so many. I can tell you that this is actually just a very small sample of the pikes that were in his collection. In our warehouse currently, we must have 30. And they're very interesting, and he had an interest in them. And I would say favorite in the catalog, of course, is the one that is referred to as a John Brown pike. And I'm saying this off the top of my head, so your listeners or viewers may have to acquaint themselves with our extensive description. I believe that these pikes were ordered by John Brown or one of his associates from a firm called Collins and Co. out of Connecticut. And they were stored in a warehouse, but not actually used. And there were a number of them. And then after he was hanged and put away, the pikes sold as souvenirs. So to this day, they're extremely collectible, and I think the bidding is already competitive, and we're still 7 days before the sale.
No, that's fantastic. And when I look at those pikes, exactly what you said, I thought of like medieval times, right?
Yeah,
You know,
that's right.
you know,
it's very medieval times. It's a medieval weapon, but
yeah,
you know
just
that
sitting there eating my chicken or turkey leg and watching the jousting, right? That's a good time. So,
it's there's something very I don't know about romantic, but there's something very like tragic about like pikes in the Civil War, if for that reason, which is
right.
regiments were issued pikes. John Brown thought he was going to put an end to slavery with pikes. Like an ancient weapon with like that it's 8 feet long or whatever it is. It's completely impractical, and it just kind of goes to show that I don't think anybody really knew how these things were going to go when they started arming themselves for a war.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, arguably like the first weapon probably in human history, right?
It's a
Tie
blade on
something
a long
sharp to a
stick.
stick, right?
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. And of course, going back to our wheelhouse here, because there's a couple images I want to talk about. First of all, the one that stands out to me on this page, right here, this one is just absolutely phenomenal. It really does stand out to me. There's a lot to say about it. Kevin, do you want to lead us through this? And don't bid on it, please. No.
No promises. This is definitely one of those photographs that speaks for itself. Um, I mean, first of all, I mean, you have a man who obviously experienced an incredibly traumatic injury. The loss of both arms is remarkable, even by Civil War standards, which were pretty brutal standards. I am not aware of another photograph of a Confederate officer with that physical condition. He's standing there and is still in his uniform, in his officer's coat, which is kind of really subtly but really skilled. Has a very skilled tint to it to sort of help it pop, kind of almost give it a 3D quality. He's got that hat sort of at that jaunty angle that you like to see. He still appears proud, even though he is profoundly disabled. It's a remarkable image. I wish that it could talk. You always say, "Oh, I wish this could talk," so you could understand more about the context here. I really wish this could talk because man, what a story this would have to tell.
Well, Adam, maybe you can talk a little bit. Like we mentioned, sort of the tiers, right? I mean, one we're talking about
Mhm.
great image because it's clear. So that puts it up there. And then, of course, it's a bit of a rare image because it's a uniformed Confederate, right? Then you add the coloring, and then you add that he's wounded. I mean, this is not something you're going to come across in the wild. I know I say that over and over again, but it's just what comes up in your auctions here, what you offer, they really are top tier items.
Well, thank you. And it's credit to Alex's eye for quality that we're able to offer it, and we're privileged to be able to do so. And this is one where Kevin and I can get very granular, maybe even more
Mm-hmm.
granular than listeners or viewers might like. But because when I first saw this, I mean, frankly, the conversation was, is this the real thing? Is it theatrical?
Mhm.
theatrical, when does it date to, et cetera, et cetera. And I have been completely convinced that it is what it seems to depict, which is a double amputee officer. And that's for several reasons. First of all, it's a quarter plate tintype that's been cut down probably for an album. The fact that it
Mhm.
was a quarter plate suggests that it ended initially to be cased, so we can kind of date it 61 to 67 or something like that, which would put it in the time frame of the Civil War. And then another really great clue is this chair, which has fringe on it. And we really, in the photo collecting community, and this is just, again, we're getting kind of granular, you really only start to see that like 64 to 66 or something like that, which would be after the war. So this is probably somebody who returned home and had his portrait photographed to commemorate his service. And for that reason, it's very rare. To give you some context, this came from the Bill Turner collection, who, of course, is very well known in the photo collecting community. And maybe he knew more about it, and the provenance has been lost to history, unfortunately. But maybe someone will be able to figure out more about it and who he was.
Yeah, Bill was a legendary collector, and he really focused on Virginia photographs. So that's a good clue for the next caretaker if they want to try to go down that rabbit hole.
And I bring this one up because I think everyone sort of knows a little bit about Mosby's exploits, and to see an image of one of Mosby's Rangers is just absolutely phenomenal. What more can we talk about Mosby and this image here, this ID'd image? Adam, if you want to just lead us into this.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you why the description currently says this is a catalog preview. Please direct inquiries to info@fleischersauctions.com, because we have the name of this soldier. I'm afraid off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what it is, but we're still in the process of confirming that's actually who this subject is. And it's the same man, young man in both portraits. And we're fairly certain at this point he is, but of course, definitively attributing it is going to drastically change its value. So at this point, we're still being a little bit cautious. So I think that by the end of Monday or Tuesday, we should have that up. But he does have, I hate to tease you with this, he does have an ID. The ID is his service was very interesting. So we've just been a little bit cautious before putting it out. It was a modern attribution, I think. But these portraits also came from the Bill Turner collection, and we'll be excited once we get all the information up.
Well, as you're researching the ID, and I'd love to pick your brain about that in a second here. But Kevin, if you could just looking at this image, just what we have here. I mean, it's a clear image. What are we looking at that is just so phenomenal about this image? It's a very young portrait, right?
That's a big part of it, is that it's you have this the portrait of our boy is, I think, as it was put in the Ken Burns documentary. This is it, right? He's young, he's sort of innocent looking, but intense. And again, it's that uh, clarity that allows you to connect with the subject. um, you can infer all sorts of things by looking at this photo, and I think that's what makes a photo interesting. We have no idea whether or not any of that speculation is true, but that's part of what makes it fun. um, Mosby, we don't have to. I'm sure you've gotten very deep in previous episodes into Mosby and his exploits during the Civil War. It was obviously is a larger than life character at this point, but extremely collectible. There's a few folks who really specialize in Mosby related material, who are very passionate about building world class collections related to Mosby and his men, which will be very exciting for bidders to see and have an opportunity to buy something from attributed to the kind of the Mosby mystique is going to be fun to watch.
Adam, maybe you could just run us through this, but what does the research look like for these things? How does your team get together and start digging into the weeds of this thing and figuring out, what's authentic, how to ID things, how to date things. How does that look? Where does the magic happen? How does the magic happen?
The responsibility on our part is to not be definitive about attributions when there is a degree of uncertainty. And so there's sort of a gradient of the way that we phrase identifications. So if we're reasonably certain that a portrait depicts an individual because of contextual information, we may say something like, this portrait is as being so and so for these reasons. More research might be acquired. If the idea is solid and we have no reservations whatsoever, we will say definitively this is a portrait of John Johnson, and this is his history. If there's sort of oral provenance and there's not a whole lot of information apart from that, we'll probably relate it in the description in case it actually bears out to be true, and it's sort of a starting point for someone who may want to do further research. We'll say that, but really be cautious in the way that we express it. But as far as the research process goes, I mean, I can tell you with that the portrait of the man in lot 167, we have the name of him, and his uniform and age seems to match. That's my memory. But to definitively say it's him, it would be very nice to find another portrait, maybe taken during the time or when he was a little bit older or younger, that matches his likeness. It might be useful to find if it's been published in the past, because if it was published in 1950, that adds credibility to an extent. Or if, better yet, if it were published before then with evidence, then we could say something with substance. But the research process can be very extensive, and Kevin's intimately familiar and involved with that process. It involves making sure that the uniform matches the purported history of the soldier. It involves looking up their service. It involves trying to find other portraits. And so it can really run the gamut of what you're going to do to try to figure out who somebody was in a scholarly, accurate, honest manner.
Well, Kevin, I'm looking at this and I think it'll catch anybody's eye. What are we looking at here, Kevin?
You're looking at one of the, at least for my money, one of the best items in the sale, and it's one of the best of a great group of items, which puts it into a tier that I would suggest is elite. This is a regimental flag attributed to a Georgia unit of sharpshooters. It has a wild provenance in the sense that this was recovered by a Michigan infantryman on the march. He found it in a satchel that was discarded or hidden in some shrubbery or some brush on the march. It is a beautifully hand sewn, well documented and detailed, classic St. Andrew's cross design Confederate flag. It has all the battle honors on this flag. It's been you can see it's been well used. One amazing thing about this is, to your point about research for photos, we do that for all of these pieces. And one of the best parts of this flag is that it was talked about in a newspaper article with a picture of the exact same flag, and I believe it's 1902. So 25 years ago, this flag was published in a local newspaper telling the story of how it came to be. It's got an interesting history. It's got it counts as sort of a bringback, which or sort of a spoils of war type of item, which I think also has greater. So flags alone are very exciting, but when they have stories associated that are kind of adventurous, it elevates the character of the item to something a bit more special. I can only imagine what this is going to sell for, but I can guarantee that the person who buys it is going to be thrilled with it.
And I'm just looking at the item here, right? We got the name here for sharpshooters, right? And then also here, I'm assuming that these are the battles that they served in, right? That they put on the flag as sort of a point of pride, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So, those, both sides did that. Battle honors are a very sort of ancient tradition, but it's always meaningful to see. There are several really top shelf flags in this auction. Alex really had he really leaned into high end flags heavily, and it shows in the quality of these flags that are offered for sale. But whenever, at least for my money, when I see a flag decorated with battle honors, it's something special. I mean, people died and bled under this flag. Has it's much more meaningful than just a flag.
And we're getting close to the end here of the auction, and there's just so much. I mean, we could talk about the everything that's offered all day, but I guess I'd like to sort of end us off here with something that I have never seen before. I didn't know they were a thing. I didn't know that people own them. But a shuttle tire, is that's what this is? Adam, maybe you can tell us a little bit more. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, and I had the same experience. We were down in the warehouse that held Alex's collection in late 2024, and the manager of that collection pointed up on this rafter where the tilers were, maybe 20 feet high, and he goes, "Oh, one of those was off of Columbia, I think. Those are space shuttle tires, and they were flown in space." What? And like you, I'd never encountered anything similar, and we've never sold space shuttle tires before. So this is a first for Fleischer's auctions, and they're very exciting. When you look up past sale results, several have sold at auction before, but they're very, very rare. In fact, I think I only found, or we found during the course of our research, one or two other records of them being sold at publicly at auction. Because when NASA, I mean, they're practically deaccessioned, like every part of a space shuttle or anything that NASA produces is extensively inventoried and serialized, because if anything goes wrong, they can, figure out what went wrong. Or I guess if everything goes right, they have all the pieces of the puzzle so that they can make sure in a very meticulous way that everything went as it should have. But yeah, my understanding is that these were used by the shuttle when it returned, just like a plane does when it lands. These were dropped down, and they're huge. They must be 4.5 feet tall, something like that. And they weigh a ton. And because everything that is flown into space and that was contracted or produced by NASA, because it is extensively inventoried, we were able to definitively attribute three of them to missions. And we know exactly when they were flown and how they were used.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic, and I think it just shows that in this upcoming auction, there's something for everybody. So, Kevin, maybe you want to tell us when is the auction coming up, and where can we start bidding? Where do we go for that?
You can start bidding right now. So it's scheduled for Saturday, the 22nd of November. I when I bid, I love to bid on the website or on the app. So you can either download the app or navigate right to fleischersauctions.com and register to bid through there. It's a pretty slick interface. And I think, Adam, I'll let you kind of go into what other platforms it's available on, like Live Auctioneers, I'm sure, and that type of thing.
Yeah, parties that are interested bidders can place absentee bids and live bids during the sale on our website, fleischersauctions.com, on Invaluable and Live Auctioneers. We always encourage serious bidders to register to bid over the phone if they can't participate in person. Because then you don't have to worry about your internet connection or some other technical difficulty. So if you're very serious about a piece, we always encourage you to bid over the phone. And then if you're local or if you feel like making the trip, you can bid in person. We have two cities currently, one in Columbus proper and one in Groveport, Ohio, which is a suburb. But this sale is actually going to take place at our downtown Columbus office, which is 503 South High Street. And we would encourage you to, if you're seriously interested in any piece, if you're able to make the trip and take a look at any of the items in person, you can make an appointment to do so.
Well, thank you so much to the both of you for coming on the show, sharing these items. We greatly appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back on. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.